Most people have a person in their lives that they can go to with their problems. Not me. It's just my mom and I don't even like her much. It wasn't always this way. When I was young, we were close. My mom, dad, and I were always goofing around. Mom and dad were always together. The hardest memories are when I think about how happy we all were. That changed when I was 10, just after my dad left. He started becoming more and more distant. He didn't show up at home until late in the evening. Eventually, he stopped coming home. He didn't say goodbye to us. I was crushed by that. All he left was a letter. I still remember my mom reading that letter to me. I was big enough to read, but she wanted to read it to me. She said that his handwriting was really difficult to read. My dearest boy, I love you. These past few weeks haven't been easy for me. I've been offered a job working for the Argentinian government. I will be in charge of keeping the country safe from bad guys. It's what I've always wanted to do, but it comes at a price. What I will be doing must be a secret to you and your mother. If people find out about my family, you will be in danger. I can't come back home anymore, and you cannot come to visit me. But don't worry, I will continue to write you. I will even call when I can. Love you always, Dad. I cried when she finished the letter. My mom instinctively gave me a hug. Halfway through that hug, she pulled away. Little did I know that it was the last time that she would ever hug me. From that day on, whenever I cried, she avoided me. And whenever I tried to hug her, she retreated away from me and changed the subject with a flash of a smile. The next few months were tough. I did everything I could to get my mom's attention, but she became more and more distant. I wasn't willing to give up though. Mother's Day was coming up. I spent weeks preparing a handwritten card, along with a treasure hunt around the house for my mom. I saved up every cent that I had to buy her the perfume that she liked, even going into the city alone to buy it. It was scary, but I did it all for her. I believed that if I made this Mother's Day amazing, I'd get through to her, and we'd go back to some kind of normal. Mother's Day arrived, and my mother was out of the house early, before I was awake. She arrived at 10 p.m. that evening. I was waiting up for her. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," I said, giving her the gift. She gave me a weak smile and said thank you. "I've had a long day, kiddo. I'm going to sleep now." She left me standing there, alone, wondering what I had done wrong. I was broken and hurt. From that day on, things changed between us. Every so often, I got a postcard from my dad from Argentina. The postcards contained nothing personal, only famous quotes. Things like, "Don't judge each day by the harvest you reap, but by the seeds that you plant." When I was young, I thought these were wonderful pieces of wisdom that my dad had discovered, but I soon realized that he'd found them on a quick Google search. On my 11th birthday, he called me. He sounded different, but I was excited to speak to him. He wished me a happy birthday. "Thanks, Dad. How are you? How is work going in Argentina? I miss you so much. When are you coming home?" I had so many questions, but my dad didn't have many answers. He stuttered out a few answers and then said he had to go. I put down the phone, beating myself up. All my questions had chased him away. By the time I was 12, the postcards stopped. They were replaced by emails. My dad wrote once a month, always the same. "Hey, how are you? How's school going? Everything is fine here. The government won't let me say what we're doing, but I'm well." He'd end off with a famous quote, and I'd wait for a month to pass before I got another email. My excitement would slowly wither from reading each of these emails. I finally worked up the courage to speak to my mom about how I was feeling. But the moment I brought up my emotions, she changed the subject and found something to keep herself busy with. It was clear that my mom was too busy to listen to me. Again, I wondered how I could be so foolish to think that my mother and father actually cared about me. I was about 13 when I stopped looking for his emails. I stopped reading them. It didn't matter anymore. In my mind, they were spam now. My mom was much busier now. She had taken on another job and she was hardly ever home. She hired a babysitter to take care of me in the evenings. The babysitter and I became good friends, but I soon outgrew her care. I could take care of myself now. I was growing up quickly. As I grew older, things got even worse. I became more and more invisible to my mother. She would only notice me and speak to me when it was absolutely necessary. It made me angry, so I made it necessary for her to speak to me. I started fights at school. The teachers called her in and suspended me. On the drive home, my mom would shout at me and I'd blame her for everything. The heat of those arguments was exactly what I was searching for. It was warm and it showed me that she genuinely cared. It was amazing, but it didn't last long. After a while, she stopped coming to school when I fought. "I'm too busy," she would tell them. When I turned 14, I decided to go against everything that she said. Whatever she wanted or said, I would do the opposite. That's when I started hanging out with the bad boys in the neighborhood. She'd warned me to stay away from them, and that's what drew me right to them. It was fun hanging out with them. They had this kind of carefree life. They did whatever they felt like doing. We spent our afternoons playing practical jokes on the old ladies in the neighborhood, laughing as they chased us away with brooms from their homes. These boys were a lot like me in so many ways. Their parents didn't have time for them. That brought us closer together. Soon, we became our own family. We looked out for each other. It was great to have people care for me again. A year later, my friends and I were bored of the practical jokes. We needed something more thrilling. We started sneaking into people's houses and looking through their things. It was exciting knowing that we were always seconds away from being caught. But even if we did get caught, it was okay. We had a code of silence. We were brothers and we'd always look out for each other. Soon, the sneaking turned into breaking into houses. We kept pushing the boundaries, looking for more ways to get the biggest thrills. Up until that point, it was a game that I enjoyed playing. It was when one of my brothers fell for a girl that things turned ugly. As much as he adored this girl, she wanted nothing to do with him. We laughed about it. Move on, there are plenty of fish in the sea, we told him, but he wouldn't. She disrespected me, he said, and I'm going to teach her a lesson. Hearing him say those words scared me. Seeing the anger in his eyes told me that this time was different. This wasn't a game. We tried to calm him down, but he wouldn't listen. Worst of all, he wanted us to help him teach her a lesson. After reminding us of our brotherly code, we agreed. That night, I couldn't sleep. My stomach was tied up in vicious knots. I didn't want to go ahead with the plan, but I didn't want to upset my brothers. More than ever, I wished I could talk to my mom or my dad. But here I was, alone. What had my life come to? I barely made it through the school day. I was so distracted by my brother's plan. We waited for her in an alleyway near the school. The girl passed this way on her walk home. My job was to lure her into the alley. I saw her walking by and called her. She saw me and smiled, and she started to walk towards me. I lost my nerve. I couldn't do this. Run! Get out of here! I screamed. I felt relieved to see her run. But my brothers weren't happy. They made me pay. They beat me up and told me that I was dead to them. I was no longer one of their brothers. We'll get her without you, he said to me as they left me lying in the alley beaten and bruised. I didn't sleep well that night and skipped school the next day. My mom didn't know and didn't care either. I kept hearing my brother's words in my head. We'll get her without you. I knew that they were serious, and I knew that they were angry enough to seriously hurt her. I had to do something about it. I went to the police station and told them about my friend's plan. They took me inside the station and sent me over to a detective. He took my statement and asked me lots of questions about the names of my friends and the girl, where we went to school, etc. Then he asked me to give him a minute. Well, I need a cup of coffee. The detective's desk was a mess of files. I decided to help him out. While fixing them up, one of the files caught my attention. I recognized the name. It was my father. I opened it up and there he was. It turns out he wasn't in Argentina. He was here. I took a photo of his address and finished up my interview with the detective. He told me that he'd call my brothers in and give them a good scare. I walked to my dad's house. My mind was racing with so many ideas. Why hadn't my mother told me that he was here? I knocked on the door. It took him a minute to answer, but he did. He was surprised to see me. Son, he said. He was a bit of a mess. It looked like he had just woken up. He was unshaven and his clothes were stained. It's me, Dad. What are you doing here? Did they send you back from Argentina? He was confused. Argentina? You work for the Argentinian government, I said. The work you do protects the people. My dad told me to be quiet. He pulled me into his house. It was an even bigger mess than he was. You're right, son. I escaped, and they're out to get me. That's why I'm hiding out in this dump. I'm going to need your help. Is your mom still around? I nodded. I need $10,000. Call your mom and ask her to send me the money. The more he spoke, the more I could tell that he was lying to me. I listened for a while and told him that I'd come back. I went back to the detective and asked him about my father. I'm sorry to hear that he's your dad. He's a con man. He's been pulling cons for 15 years now. In and out of jail for the last 7. I couldn't believe it. My head was a blur, filled with all the lies I'd been fed, from my mother and now my father. I felt ashamed, angry, and confused. I was waiting for my mother when she arrived home. It was after 10 p.m. and she was exhausted. She didn't want to talk, but I didn't give her an option. I told her I'd found my dad. That was someone trying to take advantage of you, she said. But I could tell that she wasn't expecting this. I'd caught her off guard. I kept pushing her for answers. Everything you told me was a lie. She tried to distract me the way she had always done. As she walked away from me, I said the one thing that had been in my heart all of these years. The one thing that I hadn't said out loud because I was too ashamed to admit it. What did I do for you to stop loving me? She stopped then and turned around. She began to cry then. The tears coursed down her face. For the first time in years, she was seeing me, actually seeing me. I never stopped loving you. I was trying to save you, she said. From who? I asked. From me. She slumped into the corridor, shaking her head. I was a mess. It's the reason why your father left. He told me that I was too demanding, too clingy. I asked too many questions about where he was and what he was doing. He told me that a doctor friend of his had diagnosed me as crazy if I kept behaving this way. I'd lose you to social services. Eventually, he left. He told me that I was the reason you would grow up without a father. And if I knew what was good for me, I'd leave you alone before I chased you away as well. But that wasn't all. Before he left, he gave me a letter to give you. I remember that letter, I said. But you don't know that what I read to you was a lie. I didn't believe her. I didn't believe any of this. I asked her to show me. Reluctantly, she did. The letter said, "Son, got to go. Dad." I read it over and over. And now, I started to cry. That was all he had to say? My mom nodded. I couldn't let him break your heart like that. So I made up a story. I sent you postcards and then emails. I even paid someone I work with to call you and pretend to be your father. My mom explained that the real reason my dad left was that his victims had finally caught up with him. More than 20 people showed up at the house demanding the money that he'd swindled from them. I took on the second job to pay these people back. By next month, I would have paid back every cent that he stole. We both went quiet for a long time. It was a good quiet. It felt warm and honest. Why didn't you tell me? I eventually asked. Your father was very persuasive. He made me believe that I was a bad mother, that my care was actually obsession, and that I would chase you away with my intensity. For years, I've blamed myself. It was safer to tell you a story. It was safer to keep you far away from me. I watched her now. The woman that I had come to hate for reasons I couldn't understand. Now, with her defenses down, crumpled into a heap, I saw the woman that I had loved. The woman who had loved me. All the years of hating her washed away in that moment. I walked over to her and gave her a hug. That hug was like a bridge, connecting me to that 10-year-old version of me. We sat like that for a long time. I hugged her while she cried, and she hugged me back. The next day, we went to the police station and spoke to the detective. My mom had enough evidence of my dad's scams to get him arrested for good. He had spent every cent of the money he had stolen, but that didn't matter. My mom stopped working her second job after she'd finished paying my dad's final debt. We used the free time that she now had to reconnect. The detective was true to his word. He scared my brothers so badly that they stopped messing around. They even stopped talking to each other. They never spoke to me again, but I don't care. Silence has a way of destroying beautiful things. The truth is so much better. The end.